Ethan Harper always had music in his veins. From the first time he strummed his father's old acoustic guitar at the age of 12, he knew he wanted to spend his life on stage. His teenage years were spent in his room, learning every chord, riff, and melody he could find. By 22, he had joined a small indie band called the Rusty Strings. They played at local bars, small festivals, and sometimes even weddings. Life was simple, but it was far from easy. They made just enough money to pay for gas, cheap meals, and equipment maintenance. Ethan lived for the thrill of performing, the feeling of the crowd's energy as he shredded through solos, losing himself in the rhythm. But as much as he loved it, reality always struck after each gig. The band would sit in the back of a beaten-up van, counting out the money they had made that night, which usually wasn't enough to cover their rent. His dream of making it big in the music world seemed more distant with every passing day, but Ethan couldn't imagine doing anything else. One chilly Thursday evening, the Rusty Strings played at a dimly lit bar called the Blue Note. It was a rough night. Only about 15 people showed up, most of them too distracted by their phones or beers to pay attention to the band. But Ethan gave it his all, as he always did. He lost himself in a soulful solo, his fingers dancing across the strings. As he played, he noticed someone new in the back of the room. A tall man with slicked-back hair and an expensive-looking leather jacket. He leaned casually against the bar, but his eyes were fixed on Ethan. After the set, as the band was packing up, the man approached Ethan with a smile that revealed perfectly white teeth. "Hey, kid, that was some impressive playing," he said, handing Ethan a card. "Name's Marcus Tate. You've got something special. You know that?" Ethan was taken aback. Thanks. I appreciate it," he stammered, glancing at the card. Marcus Tate was a name he recognized, famous for producing chart-topping hits and turning struggling artists into stars. Ethan had seen his face on music magazines and industry websites, but he never imagined they'd cross paths, especially not in a place like the Blue Note. "Look, I'm in town for a bit, scouting new talent. I think you got the chops to go further than this." "Much further," Marcus continued, gesturing to the shabby bar around them. "Ever thought about recording some of your own music? Maybe stepping out on your own?" Ethan's heart raced. He had always written his own songs, scribbled in notebooks, and recorded on an old tape deck. But the idea of going solo had never felt realistic. The band was his safety net, his comfort zone. "I don't know," Ethan said hesitantly. "I'm with the band, you know." Marcus smiled knowingly. "Look, I'm not saying abandon your friends, but think about what you want for yourself. I can give you my number, and we'll talk when you're ready." He patted Ethan on the shoulder and left, disappearing into the chilly night. For days, Ethan couldn't think of anything else. He wanted to tell his bandmates about Marcus, but he feared they'd see it as a betrayal. So, he kept the card tucked away in his wallet and let the idea simmer. Meanwhile, the Rusty Strings continued playing their usual gigs, with Ethan's mind always drifting back to that moment at the Blue Note. One night, after yet another poorly attended show, Ethan sat alone in his cramped apartment, strumming his guitar and staring at Marcus's card. Frustration and longing churned within him. He knew he was stuck, but he also knew that taking a leap could mean everything or nothing. After hours of internal debate, he picked up his phone and dialed the number. "Marcus, it's Ethan," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I think I'm ready to talk." Marcus's response was almost immediate, as if he had been expecting Ethan's call. "Ethan, I'm glad you reached out. Meet me at Studio 23 tomorrow. Noon sharp. I think you're going to like what I have in mind." The next day, Ethan found himself standing outside Studio 23, a sleek, modern building in the heart of the city. Inside, the place was like nothing he had ever seen. Walls covered with gold and platinum records, photos of famous artists who had recorded there, and state-of-the-art equipment that made his old band's setup look like toys. Marcus greeted him with the same confident smile and led him into a soundproof recording booth. "Show me what you've got," Marcus said, handing Ethan a guitar. Play something that comes from the heart." Ethan took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and let the music flow. He played one of his original songs, one he had never shared with anyone, not even his bandmates. It was raw, filled with longing and hope, and as he played, he poured all of his struggles, dreams, and doubts into the melody. When he finished, the room was silent, and Marcus looked deeply thoughtful. "You've got the spark, Ethan, the kind that people look for their whole lives," Marcus finally said, his voice serious. "With the right guidance, you could be something special. I want to produce an album with you, just you. We'll keep it low-key at first, see where it goes. What do you say?" Ethan hesitated. It felt like a betrayal to leave the band behind, but a part of him knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. After all, they had been stuck in the same rut for years. So, with a heavy but determined heart, he nodded. "I'm in." The next few months were a whirlwind. Marcus pushed Ethan hard, making him refine his lyrics, tweak melodies, and explore new sounds. It wasn't easy. Sometimes Ethan left the studio feeling like he had been torn apart, but he could feel himself growing as an artist. Marcus brought in seasoned session musicians, letting Ethan focus on his guitar and vocals while they built a rich sound around him. Ethan had to break the news to the rusty strings. It was one of the hardest conversations he'd ever had. His bandmates were hurt and confused, especially Charlie, the bassist, who had been with Ethan since high school. They felt abandoned, even though Ethan tried to explain that this was something he had to do for himself. The fallout left him feeling isolated, but he poured those emotions into the music, crafting songs about friendship, loss, and ambition. One evening, after a particularly intense recording session, Marcus pulled Ethan aside. "We've got something special here. I'm going to send your single out to a few people in the industry, see what they think. Don't get your hopes up just yet, but I've got a feeling about this." Ethan spent the next few weeks on edge, waiting for news. He started playing small solo gigs, debuting the songs he had recorded with Marcus. He was nervous at first, unsure of how audiences would react without the comfort of the band behind him, but to his surprise, people listened, really listened. His voice and guitar seemed to reach them in a way that felt more intimate than anything he had experienced with the rusty strings. For the first time, he felt like his own artist, not just a guitarist in a band. Then, one night, Marcus called him with the news that would change everything. "Ethan, sit down. Your single, Golden Roads, it's going viral. People are sharing it like crazy, and I just got off the phone with someone from Indie Beat Records. They want to sign you for a full album." Ethan couldn't believe it. Just a few months ago, he had been struggling to make ends meet, playing for half-empty bars. Now, he had a record deal on the table. He signed with Indie Beat, and suddenly, everything accelerated. His social media blew up, his music was played on local radio stations, and soon enough, he was opening for well-known artists at bigger venues. With Marcus by his side, guiding his every step, Ethan released his first full album, Lost and Found. It was a mix of the raw, heartfelt lyrics he had always written and the polished production that Marcus brought to the table. The album struck a chord with listeners, and within weeks, it climbed the charts. Ethan found himself on magazine covers, giving interviews, and performing on late-night TV shows. The boy who had once played guitar in a rundown bar was now on the brink of stardom. Despite all the success, Ethan often thought about the rusty strings. He missed the camaraderie, the late-night drives between shows, and even the rough moments when they barely scraped by. But he knew he had chosen a different path, and for better or worse, it had led him here. One evening, as he sat in his new apartment overlooking the city, he received a message from Charlie. It was simple. "Proud of you, man. Hope you're doing okay." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He replied, "Thanks, Charlie. Let's catch up soon." Life had changed, but he had learned that the roots of his journey would always be a part of him, no matter how far he went. And as he looked out over the city, guitar in hand, He strummed a few familiar chords, knowing that this was only the beginning of his new story.